There are a lot of myths that people still believe when it comes to learning languages. I call them myths because these things, they really aren't true, yet people still believe them, and for a lot of people, those are reasons why they either give up on learning languages or they don't think that they are able to learn a language. So I thought I'd make a video not only mentioning these myths, but also explaining why they're wrong and the actual truth behind this is. Now, myth number one is that people think that they are too old to learn a language. They think of either children learning, for instance, English in school, or they think of people learning their first language and picking it up just in a matter of a few years. And they think that since they didn't start learning more languages at that time, that they're now somehow not able to. Now, this simply isn't true. There are a few reasons why it might be easier for a child to learn language. I would say that there are three main advantages that a child has, but I'll also explain why. We have more advantages, essentially. It just doesn't always feel like it. But children, they have a lot of time, especially when they're learning their first language. They spend all of their time awake just listening to input in that language. And when they're learning in school, let's say that they're learning English, at least the way that English is taught in our school system is that you have English for 11 years and you're also surrounded by English just from movies, series, and books, and also online gaming. That's the way that children here in Norway learn English. But especially for your first language, you get so much inputs that you start gradually understanding, which is what they call comprehensible input, which is when you get input that you don't necessarily understand word for word, but you understand what the sentence means. This means that you're gradually picking up words and thus you learn more. But children are getting this, let's say 12 hours a day, if they're up for that many hours, when they're born and to the age of 3. But let's say that they're getting that amount of hours awake. They're getting that amount of studying, whether they want to or not. They simply don't have a choice. They are exposed to that much English, or in Norwegian's case, they're exposed to that much Norwegian, which is why they're able to speak Norwegian way better than you would be if you had studied Norwegian for 3 years. Because they've actually had 3 years where everything that they've been hearing has been in Norwegian. Now, if an adult had that amount of time, they wouldn't be so far ahead. If you're able to devote maybe like 4 hours of your time every single day for 3 years, most people aren't. That's completely fine. It's just going to take a bit longer. But let's say that you were able to devote 4 hours of your time 3 years, you would be so far ahead of a child of 3 years that had spent 12 hours listening. But if the only learning that you've done is you've studied for an hour, if you've even done that, then of course they're going to be ahead of you. But you don't have to study for full 12 hours a day to get the same benefits. In fact, you don't even have to study for close to it. It's just, they're getting so much, so they're learning a lot. Now, another thing that a child has that is an advantage is that they're not afraid to screw up. Children will walk into any situation, whether they're prepared or not, and they'll do their best. That's a way that they learn. They learn by making mistakes and getting corrected, and they don't really care, provided that the correction is done in the correct way. As adults, we get embarrassed. We are afraid of screwing up, but if we weren't, then we would get the same benefits. We would walk into any situation and we would learn so much from it. And the last advantage is that children are able to produce sounds and learn to produce sounds way more easily. Their mouths aren't as stiff. Especially when I started learning Portuguese and I started speaking Portuguese, I would note my jaw was so sore after speaking for a bit. And children, they won't have that problem. But that's just something that you have to train at. It's going to get better over time, but you have to put in the work. Now, adults have several advantages, or have the advantage of actually knowing how they prefer to learn. So just based off that, adults will learn so much quicker they just have to still put in the work. Now, some people say that, oh, I can't learn a language. I'm just not the type of person who's able to learn a language. I don't have the genes to learn a language. Like, it's not in my DNA to be able to learn multiple languages. Now, I get this a lot of the time from people telling me that, yeah, you're one of those types that have it easier when learning a language. You're able to understand it, like understand the systems. You see this in a completely different way than I do. And I had this experience in school where I wasn't able to learn a language, which means that, okay, I can't learn a language. This just simply isn't true. I've put in the work to know what methods work for me. And I mean, the methods that we used in school, they didn't work for me either. I just put in some extra work and figure out what works for me. I mean, if the methods that we had used in school had actually been effective for me as well, then I would probably be speaking fluent French, because I had French for 5 years. I know basically nothing of French. I'm able to read, but I can't speak, I can't write. The only reason why I'm able to read is because I vaguely remember things, and it's not that different from Portuguese. But you'll hear so many stories of people that were unable to pick up a language in school, yet somehow, maybe in their mid-40s, they've started picking up language learning, and then suddenly in the span of 6 or 7 years, they've suddenly learned 5 new languages. Now, these are the exact same type of people who would spend their time telling me that, I mean, they can't learn a language because they failed in school. The only different thing is that these guys actually went ahead and tried different methods and figured out, okay, this works for me. Now, another myth is that people think that they simply don't have enough time. Well, learning a language is a serious time commitment. That might be true, but it doesn't mean that you have to study for hours every single day. You just have to spend a little bit of time, get into a good work rhythm, and then you can work on it for maybe 20 minutes a day. It actually works. You get better, you learn things. It's just going to take time. It is definitely more of a marathon than a sprint. There is no way to learn a language super quickly. It is going to take a lot of time, and language is a complex system, but you just have to use the time that you have and then study for however long that is, and you're eventually going to learn the language. You just have to keep it up. There are also a lot of apps that you can use just for quick language learning lessons, or just simply watching an episode of the series and such. Now, the last myth that I figured I would talk about is that learning a language is too expensive. I get that learning a language can cost a lot, especially if you're taking a course. Let's say that I wanted to try taking a course here in Norway on Portuguese. That would probably cost me close to $500 for one semester. I'm not going to be paying that much to learn a language. But for people who thinks that, okay, the only way to learn a language is studying at a school or taking a course, then of course they're going to think that learning a language costs a lot of money. I'm proof that that isn't the only way to learn a language. I've been studying Portuguese for 3 years, and I haven't really used any methods that would require me to spend a lot of money. The moment I'm watching series on YouTube, I could be watching videos on YouTube, and I'm reading books. Of course, books cost money, but I would be spending that money on books in English or Norwegian if I wasn't learning Portuguese. And I'm just reading because I enjoy reading, and I happen to be learning while doing it. Another thing is listening to podcasts. There are so many free resources that people can be using, but they simply don't know about them, or they simply don't care enough to actually try to use them. But if you use those resources instead of taking either expensive one-on-one lessons or expensive language courses for a semester, then you're going to be benefiting just as much, and it doesn't have to break the bank for you. You don't have to end up poor just because you wanted to learn a language, or you don't have to use that as an excuse for not learning a language. You don't need a lot of money to learn a language, but it does open up a lot of benefits or a lot of opportunities for you. And so I would highly suggest doing it. Just don't use any of the myths or excuses that I've been listing here as a reason for why you're not doing it. You could have a lot of other reasons that you don't want to spend time studying, or that you don't want to be learning a language. That is completely fine, but that isn't a completely different reason. That's not one of the myths that I've been listing. Now, if you formally believed any of these myths, then I hope that this video helped. And if you're interested in seeing anything else that I've been making, I make both videos in Portuguese and I make videos in English. Then I hope that you'll consider sticking around. And yeah, as always, best of luck with your studies and neck out.